The sun was setting over the vast expanse of the European countryside, casting a warm orange glow over the rolling hills and verdant forests. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers and the earthy smell of damp soil, a potent aroma that seemed to cling to every surface like a damp mist. The temperature was a balmy 72 degrees Fahrenheit, with a gentle breeze that carried the whispers of the past on its soft currents. It was the summer of 1944, and the world was ablaze with conflict as the Allied forces clashed with the Axis powers in a struggle that would determine the fate of humanity. In a small village nestled in the heart of Normandy, a group of soldiers from the 101st Airborne Division were gathered in a cramped, dimly lit room, their faces illuminated only by the faint glow of a single, flickering candle. The room was sparse, with cold, gray stone walls that seemed to closing in on them, and a low, vaulted ceiling that made them feel like they were trapped in a damp, subterranean cave. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, smoke, and gun oil, a noxious mixture that seemed to cling to every surface like a bad omen. The soldiers were all dressed in the standard issue M1941 field jacket, a sturdy, cotton garment that was designed to withstand the rigors of combat, and the M1942 trousers, which were made of a durable, woolen material that was both warm and water-resistant. They wore the M1 helmet, a sturdy, steel pot that was designed to court their heads from the harsh realities of war, and the M1941 combat boots, which were made of a tough, leather material that was both waterproof and ankle-high. Each soldier was armed with the M1 Garand rifle, a robust, semi-automatic firearm that was capable of firing 8 rounds of .306 ammunition without reloading. The M1 Garand was a reliable, battle-tested weapon that had proven itself in the harsh environments of North Africa and Italy, and it was the primary firearm of choice for the Allied forces. As the soldiers waited in silence, their eyes fixed on the flickering candle, they could hear the distant rumble of artillery fire, a low, thunderous sound that seemed to vibrate through every molecule of air. The sound was like a living thing, a primal, pulsing entity that seemed to grow louder and more intense with each passing moment. It was a sound that seemed to speak to something deep within their souls, a reminder that they were not alone in this conflict, that there were other men, fighting and dying, in a desperate bid for freedom and survival. The room was small, with barely enough space for the dozen or so soldiers who were gathered there. They were all seated on the floor, their backs against the cold stone walls, their eyes fixed on the candle as if it were a beacon of hope in a world gone mad. The only sound was the soft crackle of the flame, and the distant rumble of artillery fire, a constant reminder of the dangers that lay outside. The soldiers were all exhausted, their faces drawn and pale, their eyes sunken from lack of sleep, and their bodies bruised and battered from the rigors of combat. As they waited, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing man with a rugged, weathered face and a pair of piercing, blue eyes that seemed to bore into their very souls. He was dressed in the standard issue M1941 field jacket, with the silver eagle of a colonel on his left shoulder and the combat infantryman badge on his right chest. He carried the M1A1 carbine, a lightweight, semi-automatic firearm that was designed for officers and non-commissioned officers, and a .45 caliber M1911 pistol, a reliable, semi-automatic handgun that was capable of firing 7 rounds of .45 ACP ammunition without reloading. The colonel's name was John, a grizzled, veteran soldier who had fought in some of the toughest battles of the war. He had a reputation for being fearless, for leading his men into the very jaws of hell, and emerging victorious against all odds. He was a natural leader, a man who inspired loyalty and devotion in his troops, and he was the perfect man to lead this mission. As Colonel John entered the room, the soldiers looked up at him with a mixture of respect and admiration. They knew that they were about to embark on a perilous journey, a mission that would take them deep into enemy territory and test their skills, their courage, and their resolve. They knew that they would have to fight for every inch of ground, that they would have to overcome impossible odds and face unimaginable dangers. But they also knew that they had Colonel John to lead them, a man who had faced the worst that the enemy had to offer and had emerged victorious every time. The colonel looked around the room, his eyes meeting those of his soldiers, and he knew that they were ready. They were ready to face whatever lay ahead, to fight for their country and for their freedom. They were ready to follow him into the very depths of hell and to emerge victorious against all odds. And with that knowledge, Colonel John began to speak, his voice low and steady and full of conviction. "Men," he said, "we have a mission to infiltrate enemy lines and to gather vital intelligence. It will be a difficult journey, but I know that we can do it. I know that we have the skills, the training, and the courage to succeed. So let us prepare ourselves, let us gear up, and let us get ready to face whatever lies ahead." As the military campaign unfolded, the intricacies of the battle plan became increasingly evident. The commander, aware of the enemy's disposition, opted for a pincer movement to encircle and ultimately defeat the adversary. The troops were divided into three main flanks: the left, the center, and the right. Each flank was tasked with a specific objective, carefully calibrated to exploit the weaknesses in the enemy's defenses. The left flank, comprising of the most experienced and battle-hardened soldiers, was positioned on the eastern edge of the battlefield. Their mission was to execute a wide, sweeping maneuver, aiming to outflank the enemy's right wing and sever their lines of communication. This flank was further subdivided into two battalions: the 1st Battalion, tasked with spearheading the assault, and the 2nd Battalion, providing supporting firepower and covering the rear. As the left flank began to move, the 1st Battalion advanced in a series of staggered formations, with each company providing cover for the next. The soldiers moved swiftly, utilizing the available terrain to conceal their approach. They traversed through a narrow defile, using the rocky outcroppings and scattered vegetation to remain undetected. Upon emerging from the defile, they fanned out into a wide arc, presenting a formidable front to the enemy. Meanwhile, the center flank, comprising of the main body of troops, launched a direct assault on the enemy's position. The center was divided into 3 regiments, each assigned a specific sector of the enemy's line to breach. The 1st Regiment, situated on the left of the center, aimed to capture a strategic hill that dominated the surrounding landscape. The 2nd Regiment, positioned in the middle, targeted the enemy's main defensive works, a complex of trenches and redoubts. The 3rd Regiment, on the right of the center, was tasked with pinning down the enemy's reserve forces, thereby preventing them from reinforcing their comrades. The center flank advanced in a dense, columnar formation, with each regiment following closely behind the other. As they approached the enemy's position, they deployed into line, presenting a wall of bayonets and rifle muzzles to the adversary. The 1st Regiment, on the left, began to ascend the strategic hill, using their artillery to soften up the enemy's defenses. The 2nd Regiment, in the middle, launched a series of furious assaults on the enemy's trenches, seeking to overwhelm them through sheer weight of numbers. The 3rd Regiment, on the right, maintained a steady fusillade, keeping the enemy's reserve forces pinned down and unable to intervene. The right flank, consisting of the light infantry and skirmishers, was tasked with executing a diversionary attack on the enemy's left wing. Their mission was to create a sense of unease and uncertainty among the enemy's commanders, thereby distracting them from the main assault. The right flank advanced in a loose, open order, with the soldiers fanning out across a broad front. They moved quickly, using their speed and agility to evade the enemy's artillery fire. As the right flank approached the enemy's position, they began to engage in a series of skirmishes, aiming to harass and disrupt the enemy's formations. The light infantry, armed with rifles and bayonets, launched a series of swift, darting attacks on the enemy's flanks and rear. The skirmishers, armed with pistols and sabers, sought to infiltrate the enemy's lines, sowing chaos and confusion among the adversary. The combined effect of the 3 flanks movements was to create a sense of confusion and disorientation among the enemy's commanders. The left flank's sweeping maneuver threatened to encircle the enemy's right wing, while the center flank's direct assault sought to overwhelm their defensive works. The right flank's diversionary attack, meanwhile, distracted the enemy's commanders, preventing them from effectively responding to the main assault. As the battle raged on, the commander continued to issue orders and adjustments, seeking to exploit the weaknesses in the enemy's defenses. The artillery, positioned on the high ground, provided supporting firepower, pounding the enemy's positions with cannonballs and shells. The cavalry, held in reserve, waited for the opportune moment to charge, seeking to deliver the coup de grace to the enemy's disorganized forces. The enemy, meanwhile, struggled to respond to the complex and multifaceted assault. Their commanders, faced with the simultaneous threat of encirclement, direct assault, and diversionary attack, found themselves unable to effectively coordinate their defenses. Their troops, subjected to the relentless pressure of the attacking forces, began to waver and falter, their morale and cohesion slowly unraveling. As the battle entered its final phase, the outcome hung precariously in the balance. The attacking forces, Having overcome the initial defenses, now faced the daunting task of breaching the enemy's inner works. The enemy, meanwhile, clung tenaciously to their positions, refusing to yield to the relentless onslaught. The stage was set for a climactic and decisive confrontation, one that would determine the ultimate fate of the campaign and the fate of the contending armies. As the battalion pushed forward, the terrain shifted from dense forests to open fields, providing an unobstructed view of the enemy's fortified positions. The 122 mm howitzers, positioned approximately 5 kilometers behind the front lines, unleashed a barrage of high-explosive fragmentation shells, each carrying 3.5 kilograms of TNT. The detonation sent shockwaves ripping through the air, causing the ground to tremble beneath the soldiers' feet. The cacophony of explosions was punctuated by the staccato bursts of 12.7 mm DSHK machine guns, providing suppressive fire to pin down the enemy. Meanwhile, the T-55 tanks, with their 100 mm D-10T2S rifles, advanced in a staggered formation, providing overlapping fields of fire to cover each other's vulnerabilities. The 850 horsepower diesel engines roared to life, propelling the 36-ton behemoths forward at a pace of approximately 30 kilometers per hour. As they closed in on the enemy's defenses, the tanks' 12.7 mm NSVT machine guns opened up, laying down a withering field of fire to clear a path through the barbed wire entanglements. The logistics of the battle were a marvel of complexity, with supply chains stretching back hundreds of kilometers to the rear echelons. Ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies were ferried forward by a combination of trucks, helicopters, and even mules, each playing a vital role in sustaining the tempo of the operation. The 1.5-ton ZIL-131 trucks, with their 6-cylinder diesel engines, rumbled forward, carrying pallets of 122 mm shells, each weighing over 25 kilograms. The drivers, seasoned veterans of countless battles, navigated the treacherous terrain with ease, dodging craters and rubble as they went. As the fight raged on, the air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke, sweat, and diesel fuel. The din of battle grew more intense, with the 30 mm 2A42 autocannons of the BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles adding their distinctive staccato bursts to the mix. The 15.4-ton IFVs, with their 300 horsepower diesel engines, careened across the battlefield, disgorging squads of infantry at key strongpoints. The soldiers, laden with backpacks, rifles, and ammo pouches, spilled out onto the ground, forming a human tide that threatened to engulf the enemy's defenses. In the midst of this chaos, the forward observers, equipped with 10x42 binoculars and SVD sniper rifles, worked tirelessly to direct the artillery fire. They crouched behind boulders, in craters, or amidst the wreckage of abandoned buildings, scanning the battlefield for any sign of enemy movement. The observers' radios crackled to life as they called in fire missions to the waiting guns, each strike carefully orchestrated to maximize its impact. The 152 mm 2A65 howitzers, positioned on the outskirts of the battle area, responded with a flurry of precision-guided shells, each one homing in on its target with deadly accuracy. As the battle reached its crescendo, the soldiers on both sides began to feel the effects of fatigue, hunger, and thirst. The relentless onslaught had pushed the enemy to the brink of collapse, but they refused to yield, fighting on with a ferocity that bordered on madness. The T-55 tanks, now mere hundreds of meters from the enemy's lines, unleashed a final, decisive barrage, their 100 mm guns firing in rapid succession as they sought to shatter the enemy's defenses once and for all. The outcome of the battle hung in the balance, as the soldiers on both sides steeled themselves for the final, brutal push that would decide the fate of the war. As the cacophony of war reached a deafening crescendo, the battlefield transformed into a maelstrom of unbridled chaos. The once coherent lines of soldiers now resembled a tangled, nightmarish tapestry, with threads of discipline and order rapidly unraveling. The very fabric of reality seemed to be torn asunder, plunging the combatants into a realm of unmitigated bedlam. In the midst of this surreal landscape, a young lieutenant, his face smeared with the grime of war and his eyes blazing with a fierce determination, rallied his dwindling cohort of soldiers. With a voice that pierced the din of battle like a clarion call, he exhorted his comrades to stand firm against the relentless onslaught, to hold the line against all odds, and to fight with every last shred of strength they possessed. The lieutenant's words, laced with a potent mix of passion and desperation, electrified the atmosphere, imbuing his troops with a renewed sense of purpose and a dogged resolve to emerge victorious from the crucible of combat. As the lieutenant's exhortations hung in the air, a symphony of clashing steel, screams of the wounded, and the staccato bursts of gunfire created a cacophonous maelstrom that threatened to consume all in its path. The earth itself seemed to shudder and tremble, as if the very foundations of the planet were being rent asunder by the unbridled fury of the conflict. The combatants, reduced to mere silhouettes against the backdrop of a smoke-filled sky, stumbled forward with a jerky, puppet-like gait, their movements dictated by the whims of fate and the harsh dictates of war. In this whirlwind of chaos, a lone soldier, his rifle clutched tightly in his sweat-slickened hands, found himself isolated and alone, a fragile, insignificant speck adrift in a tempestuous sea of violence. His eyes, wide with a primal fear, darted wildly about, searching for a glimpse of his comrades, a fleeting reassurance that he was not entirely forsaken. The soldier's breath came in short, ragged gasps, his chest heaving with a mixture of exhaustion and terror as he stumbled forward, driven by a maddening compulsion to survive, to endure, and to emerge unscathed from the abyss of war. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of smoke and the sweet, cloying scent of blood, a noxious melange that clung to the soldier's skin like a malignant entity, seeping into his pores and poisoning his very soul. The ground beneath his feet was slick with the residue of conflict, a ghastly mixture of mud, blood, and the detritus of war, which seemed to writhe and twist like a living thing, threatening to ensnare him in its grasp and drag him down into the depths of a madness-fueled abyss. As the soldier struggled to maintain his footing on the treacherous terrain, a nearby explosion sent him tumbling to the ground, his rifle slipping from his grasp as he landed with a jarring thud. The world around him dissolved into a kaleidoscopic blur of sound and color, a dizzying maelstrom that threatened to consume his very sanity. The soldier's ears rang with the aftermath of the blast, his hearing muffled by a strange, cotton-like substance that seemed to plug his ears and isolate him from the external world. In the midst of this disorienting chaos, the soldier's mind recoiled in horror, his thoughts splintering into 1,000 fractured shards, each one reflecting a different facet of his terror. His vision narrowed to a tiny, pinpoint focus, fixing on a small, insignificant patch of ground mere inches from his face, as if the very fate of the world depended on his ability to concentrate on this minute, trivial detail. The soldier's breathing slowed, his chest rising and falling with a labored, mechanical rhythm, as if he were a puppet whose strings had been severed, leaving him to twitch and jerk in a macabre dance of death. Time itself seemed to warp and distort, stretching out each passing second into an eternity of anguish and fear. The soldier's sense of self, once a cohesive, unified entity, now fragmented into 1,000 disparate shards, each one reflecting a different aspect of his personality, his fears, and his desires. The world around him, once a solid, tangible reality, had dissolved into a fluid, ever-changing landscape of terror, a realm in which the laws of physics and reality no longer applied, and the absurd, the surreal, and the grotesque held sway. As the soldier lay there, frozen in a tableau of fear, the battlefield around him continued to unfold with a grim, unstoppable logic, a remorseless juggernaut driven by the pitiless dictates of war. The cries of the wounded, the shouts of the combatants, and the staccato bursts of gunfire created a maelstrom of sound, a cacophonous symphony that threatened to consume all in its path, leaving nothing but a desolate, smoldering ruin in its wake. The soldier, a tiny, insignificant speck in this vast, sprawling tapestry of conflict, could only lie there, helpless and immobile, as the chaos of war raged on, driven by a mad, unquenchable thirst for destruction and chaos. The once pristine landscape was now a desolate expanse of rubble and ash, the air thick with the acrid smell of smoke and death. The ground was scorched and blackened, as if the very earth itself had been torn asunder by the sheer force of the devastation. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the faint moans of the wounded and the dying, their cries echoing through the stillness like the whispers of the damned. As the survivors stumbled through the wreckage, they were met with a scene of unmitigated horror. Buildings lay in ruins, their steel and concrete exteriors twisted and torn like crumpled paper. Trees were uprooted, their branches splintered and shattered, their leaves scorched and blackened. The streets were choked with debris, the rubble-strewn thoroughfares strewn with the bodies of the dead and the dying. The casualty reports were staggering, the numbers mounting with each passing hour. The death toll was catastrophic, the injured countless. Medical personnel worked tirelessly to tend to the wounded, their faces etched with exhaustion and despair. The hospitals were quickly overwhelmed, the corridors and wards filled to capacity with the maimed and the broken. Individual stories of survival began to emerge, each one a testament to the human spirit's capacity for endurance and resilience. There was Maria, a young mother who had shielded her infant daughter from the blast with her own body, suffering severe injuries in the process. There was Jake, a former soldier who had lost his leg in the explosion, yet still, managed to crawl to safety, his face set in a grim mask of determination. There was Emily, a teenager who had been trapped beneath the rubble, her screams for help eventually answered by a team of rescuers who worked tirelessly to free her. As the survivors recounted their tales of survival, a common thread emerged. Each one spoke of the initial shock and disorientation, the sense of disbelieving horror that had given way to a desperate fight for life. They spoke of the sounds of the blast, the feeling of the earth shaking beneath their feet, the sight of the devastation that had followed. They spoke of the terror that had gripped their hearts, the fear that had threatened to consume them. One survivor, a young woman named Sarah, described the moment the blast hit. "I was walking home from work," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I heard a loud noise, like a thunderclap, and then everything went white. I felt myself being lifted off the ground, like I was weightless. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the end. And then I was lying on the ground, my ears ringing, my head spinning. I stumbled to my feet, and that's when I saw it. The devastation, the destruction. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before." Another survivor, a man named Michael, spoke of the sense of disorientation that had followed the blast. "I was in a daze," he said, his eyes haunted by the memories. "I stumbled around, trying to make sense of what had happened. I saw people writhe, unfunning, screaming, crying. I saw buildings on fire, cars overturned. I saw things that no human should ever have to see. And yet, even in the midst of all that chaos, there were moments of beauty. Moments of kindness, strangers helping strangers, neighbors aiding neighbors. It was like the blast had shaken something loose, something deep within us. It was like we'd been reminded of our common humanity." As the days passed, the survivors began to rebuild, their efforts fueled by a determination to create something new from the ashes of the old. They worked tirelessly, clearing rubble, constructing makeshift shelters, and tending to the wounded. They formed communities, bonding together in the face of adversity, their shared experiences forging strong and lasting bonds. And yet, even as they rebuilt, the survivors knew that they would never forget the horrors they had witnessed. The memories of that day would stay with them forever, etched into their minds like scars on their skin. They knew that they would carry the weight of those memories with them, always. A reminder of the fragility of life and the power of the human spirit to persevere in the face of unimaginable destruction. The aftermath of the blast was a complex and multifaceted thing, a tapestry woven from threads of grief and resilience, of horror and hope. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way forward, always a chance for rebirth and renewal. And it was a testament to the human spirit, a spirit that can endure even the most profound and devastating of tragedies, emerging stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever before. The survivors of the blast would never be the same again, their lives forever changed by the events of that fateful day. But even as they struggled to come to terms with what had happened, they knew that they would emerge from the ashes, stronger, more united, and more determined than ever before. They would rebuild, they would recover, and they would remember. They would remember the dead, the injured, and the missing. They would remember the sounds of the blast, the feeling of the earth shaking beneath their feet, and the sight of the devastation that had followed. And they would never forget the sense of community, of shared purpose, that had emerged in the aftermath of the disaster. A sense of unity that would stay with them forever. A beacon of hope in a world gone mad. The aftermath of the conflict had a profound and lasting impact on the global geopolitical landscape. The shifting alliances and emergence of new world powers created a complex web of international relations, with nations vying for influence and dominance. The delicate balance of power was maintained through a combination of diplomacy, strategic military deployments, and economic coercion. As the years passed, the world became increasingly interconnected, with the rise of globalization and the proliferation of international institutions. The conflict also led to significant advances in military technology, as nations invested heavily in research and development to gain a strategic edge. The development of new weapon systems, such as drones, cyber warfare capabilities, and advanced missile defense systems, transformed the nature of modern warfare. These technological advancements have continued to evolve, with the integration of artificial intelligence, robotics, and other cutting-edge technologies. In addition to the military implications, the conflict had a profound impact on the global economy. The massive destruction and disruption caused by the war led to a significant decline in international trade, as nations struggled to rebuild and recover. However, the post-conflict period also saw a period of rapid economic growth, as nations invested in reconstruction efforts and sought to expand their economic influence. The conflict also had a profound impact on international relations, leading to the establishment of new global institutions and the strengthening of existing ones. The United Nations, in particular, played a critical role in promoting peace and stability, as nations recognized the need for collective action to prevent future conflicts. The European Union, formed in the aftermath of the war, served as a model for regional integration, as nations sought to promote economic cooperation and prevent future conflicts. As we reflect on the legacy of the conflict, it is clear that its impact extends far beyond the immediate aftermath. The war marked a turning point in world history, as nations recognized the devastating consequences of large-scale conflict and the need for collective action to prevent future wars. The establishment of the United Nations and the development of international law have helped to promote peace and stability, while the emergence of new global institutions has facilitated international cooperation and diplomacy. Despite these advances, the world remains a complex and uncertain place, with numerous challenges and threats to global peace and security. The rise of nationalism and the growing tensions between major powers have raised concerns about the stability of the international order. The ongoing conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, and other regions serve as a reminder of the enduring nature of violence and the need for ongoing efforts to promote peace and stability. As we look to the future, it is clear that the legacy of the conflict will continue to shape international relations and global politics. The lessons of history must be learned and applied, as nations seek to promote peace, stability, and cooperation in an increasingly interconnected world. The development of new technologies, the emergence of new global powers, and the growing complexity of international relations will all pose significant challenges, but also opportunities, for nations to work together to build a more peaceful and prosperous world. As we conclude our analysis of the conflict and its legacy, it is essential to recognize the importance of understanding history and its relevance to contemporary global challenges. By examining the complex and often controversial events of the past, we can gain valuable insights into the nature of conflict, the importance of diplomacy, and the need for collective action to promote peace and stability. As the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus once said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." This profound statement underscores the dynamic and ever-changing nature of human experience, and the need for ongoing learning, adaptation, and cooperation to navigate the complexities of an increasingly interconnected world. As you have joined me on this journey through the history of the conflict, I hope that you have gained a deeper understanding of the complex and often controversial events that have shaped our world. I encourage you to continue exploring the rich and fascinating history of our world, and to seek out new knowledge and perspectives on the challenges and opportunities that we face today. If you would like to learn more about the history of the conflict and its legacy, I invite you to subscribe to our channel, where we will continue to explore the complex and fascinating world of military history. By subscribing, you will gain access to a wide range of documentaries, lectures, and other resources, all designed to help you deepen your understanding of the past and its relevance to the present. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I look forward to sharing more of the fascinating story of our world with you in the future.